And I'm just looking this woman up and down, trying to pretend to still be asleep with my eyes open, but I'm just frozen there, but not like sleep paralysis. I could have moved. I knew I could have moved, but I was just laying there pretending like I wasn't seeing anything, just paralyzed with fear. So a couple years ago, I thought it would be a good idea to visit my friend Ryan for his birthday. He had recently moved to Colorado with his girlfriend because that's where she was originally from. And she would just nag him about how much he wanted to move back. Obviously, the whole group of friends was sad to see him go, but just out of respect, we respected the decision because we knew how much he loved his girlfriend. And despite how much we dreaded him leaving, we really wanted him to be happy and go build his life with his new lady. And whenever somebody moves away, everybody promises to go visit, and then they never do. But our group of friends is different. We knew that we were going to go out of our way to go see him after he moved. It had been about 6 months since he moved, and obviously we wanted to give him time to settle in, but his birthday was coming up, so we wanted to start scheming about a plan to go see him. Plus, I was really looking forward to having an excuse to go to Colorado because that state is filled with natural beauty. So I just texted a bunch of our mutual friends and I just threw a bunch of bait out there to see who I could catch on the hook that would want to come with me. And our one mutual friend, Will, was available. See, it was the middle of July and most of our friends are married with kids now, so not so many people are available, but Will was. We didn't really want the vibe to be a family-friendly trip anyway. We kind of wanted a more of an adult feel to it. I mean, it could have been, people could have brought their kids because we were just planning on going hiking and camping in Gunnison National Forest, but we kind of knew that we wanted a more adult feel to it anyway. As much as we love our friends' kids, bringing young kids on this type of adventure just wouldn't fit the vibe. So anyway, I shot all these texts to my friends and only Will replied, and somehow he was available even though his life situation didn't seem like he would be. But he answered, and I figured it would be nice to see him because I didn't really want to travel there alone. And I'm just going to be honest right now, I'm not all that fond of planning. When I get an idea to do something, I just kind of spontaneously do it. It's not the best quality of mine. All I knew is that I wanted to get to Colorado, meet up with Ryan, and explore nature in Colorado. I just had the feeling inside me that I wanted to do it, and that's what I was going to do. And whoever else wanted to come could come. I didn't really care if anybody came or not. And once I had this spur of the moment idea, I started researching. I don't like planning, but I wanted to research ahead of time a little bit. And I found Gunnison National Forest. I took one scroll on Google search and I knew that that was the place that we're going. I also knew that Bree, Ryan's girlfriend, would probably come with us as well, which is cool because I wanted Ryan to enjoy his birthday and I knew he would have a better time if Bree tagged along. And we were just planning on hiking and camping in a beautiful area, and it's not like all of the guys were coming, so nobody would mind if Bree tagged along. It's not like we were planning on going to any bars or anything like that, because that's not Ryan's style and that's not mine either. We wanted to get out into nature and have a good time. Ryan is just a super down-to-earth guy. He has this fun, hippie vibe to him, and any chance to spend some time in nature, he'll hop on it. To be honest, I always thought that he would end up somewhere warmer so he could spend as much time as he possibly could outside. But he doesn't really have a preference for weather, which is surprising. He likes it all and he appreciates it all, and that's just something that we love about him. He's just a genuinely happy guy, and just being around him just gives you this level of peace. Will's a little bit different. He's more on the wild side. He doesn't really go out much anymore because him and his wife had a baby 2 years ago. But when he does decide to slide out with the boys, things get a little bit out of hand. Personally, I don't think he finds that much genuine happiness in his day-to-day life. So he looks for ways to escape when he can. I wouldn't say that his marriage is necessarily failing, but he is the type to paint the image of his life in a better light than it actually is. He wants you to believe he is happy and he has it all. But it's odd, from the outside looking in, kinda just seems like he's trapped in this life. And it's because his wife, Grace, accidentally got pregnant about 6 months into their relationship. And they weren't necessarily thrilled about it. And they weren't necessarily crazy for each other either. It was more of a convenient relationship. And from what I could remember, I remember him chatting about leaving her. I always thought their relationship was weird because they would always just have these big outbursts and fight, and then they would just start love bombing each other, and it was just kind of this horrible cycle of I hate you, I love you. And they were forced to get married to make their parents happy, and the only reason they did it was because they were pregnant. And of course, I'm happy that he stepped up. I would be really upset with him if he didn't. I just hope one day he actually feels the happiness from providing for a family. But anyway, after Will confirmed with me that he was going to be coming on this trip, I let Ryan know and he was pumped. And Ryan let me know that he hadn't gotten as much of a chance to explore as he really wanted to upon moving there. When you relocate to a new state and you uproot your life and go somewhere else, you tend to spend a lot of time at home in your new space and working a lot to just try to make up the funds that you spent moving. But Ryan was super excited and he was super happy that Will was coming too. Ryan was never bothered by Will's naturally chaotic nature, even though it was such a contrast compared to his own personality. These two dudes were like complete opposites. I guess things just work that way. Sometimes you're just attracted to the opposite person. And I told Ryan that I also invited all of the other guys because I wanted to make it this big, fun, extravagant surprise weekend, but everyone had other obligations and other responsibilities and they couldn't make it. I just wanted Ryan to know that even though all the other guys weren't coming, they really miss him and they're going to plan something with him soon. But in all honesty, I'm not that disappointed everybody else couldn't make it. I didn't really want a big, massive group going camping all together. Even though the more people that come, it seems like a safer option, sometimes it could get very hectic. It's different if we were going somewhere that's like a 3-hour drive away, but I really didn't want the hassle of coordinating a bunch of flights with a bunch of different people and then how is everybody getting from point A to point B and everybody's going to get to the campsite. It was just this whole massive operation of an issue. I'm happy that it was less people to go on this trip. Because like I said, I'm not big on planning, and I knew that if I suggested it, everybody would go, okay, we'll come, what's the plan? So I was happy they said no. I just had to extend the invite because if they saw pictures of us in Colorado together, me and Ryan, they might get a little bit upset, a little bit jealous. And I also didn't want my friends to feel like I would intentionally leave them out of a fun trip, because people get like that sometimes. People tend to say no to big plans like that, but they do appreciate the gesture of getting an invitation. And I was totally okay with Will coming because he tends to shy away from extensive planning anyway. He is a little bit more like me. He's a spontaneous guy. I just sent him the date, the flight that I was taking, and where we were going, and he was okay with that. Hopefully he talked it over with his wife, but knowing him, maybe he didn't. But he responded almost immediately. He just said, I'm in, and I'll meet you at the airport. And the weeks leading up to this trip went surprisingly fast. You know, like when you're looking forward to something, it tends to catch up to you quickly. I think it felt that way because it was summer. And this trip wasn't planned because I wanted to escape the brutal winters that we get here in the Midwest. It was just based on seeing a good friend, so the energy leading up to it was positive. And I guess that, along with the warm weather, made time zoom by. And when the day finally arrived, I just FaceTimed Will while I was in my Uber to the airport. And he was actually already at the airport. I don't know if he got there extra early on accident, or he was just so excited and couldn't wait to leave, so he got there 3 hours before the flight. But at least he wasn't going to be late, which is fantastic. And when I finally made it through TSA and I got up to the terminal, I found Will sleeping in one of the seats with his head hanging over his backpack. So I walked over to him and I just lightly kicked his foot to get him to wake up. And when he woke up and looked up at me, I could tell that he was super hungover. I couldn't tell while we were on FaceTime because it was pretty loud in the airport around him and the connection wasn't the best. But now that we were face to face, I could see the bags under his eyes from the drinking of the night before, and I could smell the alcohol coming off his pores. This wasn't particularly out of the ordinary for him, but I just wouldn't expect him to get this drunk the night before a relatively early flight. It wasn't a red eye, but it was pretty early in the morning, and it was going to take us over 3 hours to get to Denver. If we got a flight that went straight to Gunnison, it would have gotten us closer to the park. But Ryan and Bree lived in Denver, so we were going to spend the first night at their house before heading to Gunnison National Park. It was about a 5-hour drive from their house, to be exact. I wasn't super pumped about a 5-hour drive, but I was already mentally prepared to go there. And then Ryan solidified that decision. He would just drive 10 hours to get to a beautiful place. He didn't care at all. And I realized in that moment that I actually hadn't seen Will since Ryan's going away party. He looked much more worn down than I remember. And you know, maybe it was because he was up late drinking the night before. Or maybe life has been pretty rough on him lately. And I knew that he wasn't actually going to tell me the reality of the situation, no matter how much I pried. Because like I said earlier, Will paints his life like how he wants you to see him. And he doesn't want you to see him for what he really is. But just trying to be a good friend, I asked anyway. I didn't know what else to say, and honestly, I was a little bit annoyed that he showed up hungover, so I just said, yo, you look like shit. And he laughed initially before running his fingers through his hair, as if he was trying to fix his hair to look more put together. Will was always a very well put together, groomed guy. His hair was always neat every time I saw him. He always had a clean shave, and his clothes, no wrinkles, always dressed pretty nice. And he may or may not get his eyebrows done here and there. But it comes with the territory of his job. He's in sales and he has to look presentable for the people he's trying to sell to. So it makes sense why he puts a certain amount of effort into his appearance. But today he looked so different. He just looked more rugged and less put together. The bags under his eyes were like marshmallows, and it looked like he hadn't done anything to his beard or hair in months. And not to be mean, but it looked like he gained a couple pounds too. He just looks more like a dad now, which makes sense because he is one. But I also felt a little bit worried about him. It's always hard seeing your friends in such a short period of time, only 6 months, and they look so different. Because not only did he not look like his usual well put together self, he wasn't acting like himself either. It's not uncommon for me to find him hungover, but he just never seemed so dull. Usually he's hungover, but he's excited to get it going again. Like, this is the first time I've seen him in 6 months, and I could barely get a laugh out of this guy, which was really weird because he's usually the person that's like very easy to get a belly laugh out of. And after what felt like the 7th failed attempt at making him laugh, I just said, "Are you okay, bro? Like, do you not feel good or something?" And he just gave me a little smirk and looked down at the ground before saying, "I've just been pretty exhausted, man. And I don't know, I've just been feeling a little bit down lately." I was actually kind of shocked by this because he didn't even bother trying to lie. Because remember, Will doesn't like showing the real version of himself. He'll sugarcoat everything. He just tries to put off this aura that everything's good with him. Never anything to worry about, not with him. But this time was very different. He just admitted to me that he wasn't okay. And just as I was getting ready to pry a little bit more, he started to laugh a little bit more, and then he said, "Man, I probably just have to sleep off the night I had last night. I had a couple too many, and I think it's just getting to me." And then he goes, "Bro, I'm gonna fall asleep on the flight. I'm gonna get 3 hours in, and I'm gonna wake up a new man, and I promise we're gonna have a good time." But I just looked at him for a little bit because I had never seen him like this, and he must have seen the concern in my eyes, because he shot his eyes back down to the floor and just changed the subject immediately. He started trying to change the subject and direct it towards me and asking me how I'm doing and how's things with my life and what is this national park that we're going to, just asking me details that weren't about him. So I just went along with it, and I caught him up with everything that's going on in my life, and I started pulling up pictures of the park. And that's all we did until we got onto the plane. So once we were settled in our seats and we took off, the flight attendants came around to give us our snacks. And that's when I overheard Will ask for a whiskey instead of a bag of pretzels. And I just looked at him with a really stale look on my face. And I could tell he got a little bit insecure, and he said, "Don't worry, I'll be out right after this. It's the best cure for a hangover is another one. And then when we land, I'll feel fantastic and I'm back to being me, I promise. Don't look at me like that, just relax." Normally, I wouldn't think twice about him ordering a drink. I wouldn't care. But he was already just not being himself, so it made me a little uneasy. I was done with his energy, and I wanted to know what was really going on because I wanted to help him through it. But he just downed this whiskey and went right to sleep like he said, so I didn't have the chance to talk to him. I wish I was able to contact Ryan on what to expect when we got there. But I guess he'll just have to see it for himself. Like, right when he looks at Will, I know he's gonna know what's going on. Since I had nobody to talk to, I actually managed to fall asleep myself, and I woke up right as we were landing in Denver. And I look over and I see that Will's waking up too. And guess what? He's not looking fantastic and like a new man like he said he was going to. Somehow he managed to look significantly worse than from when we took off. Then I started getting waves of anxiety by the thought of Ryan's birthday weekend getting tainted by this type of energy. I started to wish that I didn't send out those texts or somebody else came with me. But then I started to feel bad because Will is my friend. Maybe this is the release that he needs from his life. Maybe this is gonna turn it around for him. He's gonna feel much better after this. I just hoped I was gonna be able to have a serious conversation with him and get through to him at some point in this trip. When we finally got off the plane, we just headed to find Ryan and Bree. We only had carry-on backpacks with us, so we didn't have to go to the baggage claim. And Ryan had acquired so much camping gear over the 6 months that he had been living there, but he couldn't find the time to actually use it because he'd been working so much more that he insisted that we use all of his stuff. Obviously, I had no issue with that because I personally have had my bags misplaced by the airline and sent completely to the other side of the airport, so not having to bring any luggage with me was a plus. I was pretty eager to get out of there and just get on with our trip, so I was walking pretty fast. But I noticed Will's just dragging ass far behind me in this airport. And I was trying my best not to be frustrated with this guy because he's clearly going through it, but we're here for Ryan. This is his friend's birthday. Maybe it's just me, but I'd at least try to be in a better mood for Ryan, or maybe not show up to a flight hungover. Or if I knew that that wasn't possible for me to feel better, I just wouldn't come. The energy that was just coming off of this guy was so dark and heavy, and it was getting worse by the second. And I started thinking that he probably should have just stayed home. I want to get him a hotel in Denver and just leave him there. But it's Ryan's birthday weekend, so I'm here and I'm going to carry us both through this weekend to make sure Ryan has a good time. And as we're approaching the exit doors, I could see Ryan in his car waving his hand out the window, super excited to see us. He looked so happy, and it made me feel so fulfilled that he was so excited to see his friends visiting him. He popped out of the car and just gave us both a big bear hug. And I see Bree in the driver's seat, so I just give her a little wave too, like I'm excited to see her. I want her to be a part of this moment as well. And she looked as cheery and vibrant as she always does. And after we threw our bags in their trunk, we just hopped into the back seat and headed to their house. There wasn't much traffic, so the drive to their house wouldn't be more than 30 minutes. But that was still plenty of time when you're excited to see somebody to get all of the catching up out of the way. We're just chatting it up the entire time. And the first thing that comes to my mind as I'm looking around their car is that I like this car, so I start telling them how much I like their new car. It was this sweet red Jeep Wrangler that really fit the vibe of the weekend. This thing was the perfect adventure vehicle. This was about to be awesome. And Ryan started updating us about his last 6 months and how the new job had been for him. And as he's catching us up, I start to look through the rearview mirror, and I could see Bree glaring up at the rearview mirror at Will, just really pissed about how he looks. I could tell that she noticed something was off about him right away. And maybe Ryan did too, but Bree's not the type to hide how she's feeling. Like, you see it on her face. Bree was super into that new age stuff, but I was never really into that stuff. To put it bluntly, Bree carries around crystals and burns sage and carries tarot cards in her pockets. It's not my vibe. But I could see it in her face that she's looking at Will like she would usually look at us. She was about to tell us that our energy was off and that we needed some type of spiritual clearing. I wasn't super positive about how she was thinking, although I could see it on her face, but I was happy that somebody else was aware about what Will was bringing to this trip right now, and I wasn't the only one noticing it. Because it wasn't just about that he didn't look groomed and that he had marshmallow bags under his eyes and he looked horrible and he actually stunk a little bit. It was the fact that you could feel his energy depleting you as you were sitting next to him. Ryan didn't seem to really catch on to it yet, although I had a suspicion that he did notice. But he was just so excited to have us here that it seemed like he was overlooking the situation. I knew that once we got a moment alone, he'd probably bring it up to me. I'm going to spare you guys the details about the night that we had at Ryan and Bree's house before we went on the actual trip, because it was just normal. We had dinner, it was cool. Their home was absolutely beautiful, and I was so happy for them because they really settled into a beautiful life together. And also, just update on Dirtbag Will, he did not get any better. He looked as lifeless as he did at the airport when I found him, as he did when we sent him to bed that night. But anyway, we woke up pretty early the next morning because we wanted to get to the campsite pretty early in the afternoon. And I come outside and Ryan is just loading the truck with everything that we need, and Bree is packing all the food. I was gonna pop over to Ryan to see if he needed any help, but just as I'm about to go help Ryan, Bree calls me over to talk to her. So I just walk over, I'm like, "What's up, Bree? Good morning." And Bree looks at me dead serious and goes, "Make it look like you're helping me because I need to talk to you about something really quick." So I just kind of start shuffling stuff around the counter to make it look like I'm busy. And I'm just kind of handing her random condiments because I don't really know what to do. I just want her to start talking. And right as I'm about to say something to try to get her to start talking, Will walks out of the bathroom. And he comes into the kitchen with us. And he looked a little bit better. I'll give him a 10% improvement. And it might just be because he looked more clean. He probably got a shower in. But nothing else about him had changed. He still had this down, dark energy about him. And Bree just put on her poker face and just asked Will if he could go outside and help Ryan. And she just tried to be nice and try to encourage Will to go help Ryan by saying that she could see how much Ryan was struggling trying to fit in everything in the car by himself. And Will just gave her just this odd, lifeless smirk and just headed outside, like that he wasn't staying in her house. It was borderline disrespectful. And I swear, seeing him act this way made me feel like I was in some type of fever dream, because the man that I know isn't that inconsiderate of people's houses or their spouses. I was so excited about this trip, but everything around me just felt so off and bizarre. But Will finally went outside, and when the door closed behind him, Bree looked at me and started talking. And she goes, "You need to tell me what's wrong with him." And I'm just like, I really don't know. I found him like that at the airport. He told me that he was a little bit hungover, a little bit down, and a little bit exhausted, but he promised that after a night's sleep, he was gonna be back to his old self. And she just stood there with this skeptical look on her face, and she goes, "Well, is he depressed or something? He seems depressed to me. Did you ask him about Grace? Did something happen with them?" And to be honest, when I was thinking about it, I wouldn't be surprised if something did happen between him and Grace. But then I started spiraling about different thoughts because I was like, oh my God, is his daughter okay? Is he like deeply depressed about something that happened with his daughter? Because selfishly, I was thinking about how his awful demeanor was making me feel and how he was going to drag down this trip. But I hadn't actually taken any further steps to find out what was wrong. Because what if it is something serious? What if he's here and he's just holding in this horrible grief? So I just made a mental note, and I promised myself that at some point today I was going to try to get through to him, because at least I had to try. And at this point, we had just about finished packing the food and organizing everything into the coolers. And it looked like Ryan and Will were done sorting the car too, so we were pretty much ready to go. But I glanced back at Bree and I see her analyzing Will's behavior still through the window, and I could see her face filling with tension as she's like clenching her jaw, just so pissed that this guy's here. And as I was grabbing one of the coolers to bring it over to the car because we had a little bit of space left, obviously for the food, I hear her mumble something under her breath. And like I said, she was a little hippy dippy and into crystals and stuff like that. And I hear her mumble to herself, "He's festering in darkness. He's gonna attract something to him and to us. I know it." And I'm just standing there a little bit confused about what she said. But I also didn't believe Bree could feel spirits, and I didn't really believe that crystals work. But either way, we both recognized that something was off, even though we had different feelings about what was actually off. We both just wanted to celebrate Ryan's birthday with him. and we were going to get to the bottom of Will's disturbingly depressive behavior at some point this weekend. But on the bright side, Ryan was in a fantastic mood, so things on that end were going great. And once we put the food into the car, he was so ready to hop in and start this long drive. And I was so happy that he wanted to do this entire drive by himself, because I offered to split it with him, but I didn't want to. I wanted to sit passenger princess. I would have done it if he said yeah, but I was very happy to sit in that passenger seat and point at mountains and go, ooh, pretty. And surprisingly, the drive went by much faster than I thought it was going to. And I realized that I really missed Ryan, because he has a way about him that drags you into these multi-complex, intriguing conversations, and time just flies by with him, because he just brings up very thought-provoking, fun topics. Bree was just knocked out in her seat, so she wasn't a part of the active conversation. But I just kept going back and forth between Ryan and Will, just kind of looking at both of them as we were having these talks. And I wanted Will to start engaging in the conversation with us like he usually does. He seemed to force himself to pretend like he was listening, but he didn't have anything to say, which is not like him. But at least he's being a little bit more present, and he's not just falling asleep hungover, so that's a good sign. And just as I think that things are taking a turn for the better and this weekend's actually ramping up to something that's about to be fun, I see Will shuffling in his bag. And this man pulls out a bottle of rum and opens it. And the first thing that goes through my head is what does this guy think he is, Jack Sparrow? Who drinks rum other than Jack Sparrow? And he puts the bottle to his lips, and I could tell that he's feeling a little self-conscious about it, because he frantically offered us some. He tried to be playful with it, but you could tell that he was just insecure about doing it, but he couldn't stop himself from doing it. So it just came off awkward. Plus, he knows that me and Ryan both don't drink at all. And this was the first time I could see a break in Ryan's facial expression, and I could tell that he knows that something's wrong too. But I could tell that he wasn't ready to address it. But Ryan hid the way he was feeling pretty well, and he just goes, "Go ahead, man, it's all you. We know you like to get the party started early," and just kind of kept the vibes neutral. And Ryan let out a genuine laugh, and I could tell that made Will feel a little bit more comfortable. But I wasn't feeling that humorous. I wasn't cool about this. So I turned to Will and I go, "Did you bring that thing on the plane with you?" And this guy had the audacity to reply to me, "Well, I must have, because I didn't buy it here." And listen, I love Will, and my intention is not to down him and be judgmental. But what he's doing and making this entire weekend about himself, just drinking in every single corner that he possibly can, isn't right. And it's not like him. He's not partying like he usually does. We don't mind when he hits a shot here and there and pours a little bit of whiskey in his coffee. This is different. He's self-medicating, and it's not good for him. He's forcefully drinking in weird, awkward ways. I don't want to see him do this. And the air became a little bit still, and we all became quiet for a moment in the car. We weren't having fun. And then Will finally breaks the silence by saying, "I know I'm acting a little bit different, guys. I'm aware of it. I'm just going through a rough patch in my life right now. But your birthday is tomorrow, Ryan, and I just want to focus on that, okay, guys? Can we please just have a good time?" And I'm just watching Will basically chug this bottle of rum, spilling on himself in the back of this car, as he was making his attempt to explain his recent behavior. It was sad to see him kind of falling into this bottle of liquor. For me, it just pisses me off watching somebody just pour all of their problems into a bottle. You are the man of your household. If you have a problem in your life, you have a kid too. You have to find a way to fix it. You don't just drown your sorrows in rum. Moping around and drinking is not the way to fix your life and lead your family. And after just a couple moments of silence, I didn't get enough of an explanation like I wanted. So I keep it going, and I'm like, what happened in your life that triggered this? What is actually going on with you? And this guy just takes a big deep inhale and just lets out a long sigh, and a wave of rum from his mouth just hits my face. And when I recover from this wave of rum, I look back at him, and he's slowly turning his head towards me. And this man says, "I recently found out that I hate every aspect of my life." And Ryan heard that, and he immediately butted in and was like, "Yo, we know that's not true. Come on." And Will replied to him. He almost snapped back at him. "Yes, it is. Literally not one thing in my life makes me happy." And I replied, trying to get him back to reality, because he's clearly losing himself in that bottle. "Your daughter makes you happy, right?" And Ryan agreed with me and was like, "Yeah, right. You have your daughter, right? That's beautiful." And this man took a moment. Instead of just saying "Yes, I love my daughter. I live for her," he took a moment, and then he said, "Well, I do love her, but honestly, I kind of resent her. And I think I'd like my life a lot better if we didn't have her, because then I wouldn't have had to force myself to marry Grace. All we do is talk about divorce now, but it would just be this huge financial mess. And I don't know what to do, guys. I don't know what to do." Guys, I know you love this story, but you'll love the lives just as much. The community is amazing on there. I just want everybody to be a part of the giveaways that we're doing. I want to give back to the community that's giving so much to me. So please, I want to see you on Monday, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a live. Appreciate you guys. Back to the show. And Bree must have woken up at some point during this back and forth with Will. I would imagine it was when the wave of rum hit her nose and it abruptly brought her awake, because she just randomly butt into the conversation and she just kind of snaps at him like, you know, you should really be more grateful. You may not be happy in your marriage, but maybe you can do something about that. And doing what you're doing right now and just talking bad about your daughter and your wife to your boys that you think is going to be therapeutic is not the right thing to do. And listen, it's not that we were all trying to gang up on Will and make him feel even worse, but clearly this guy needed a reality check. And looking back on it, I do feel bad about not handling that situation a little bit more delicately, but I hope you guys could imagine what it's like to try to make this beautiful birthday weekend for your friend and some dude is acting like Jack Sparrow the entire weekend. And no conversation followed after that. It was actually just a very tension-filled, awkward car ride after that, but we eventually made it to our destination, and we were just hoping that things would get better from there. And the thing that would help us have a better time is arriving at one of the most beautiful places that I had ever seen. This place did not disappoint. The pictures don't even do it justice, and if you look up the pictures of Gunnison National Park, you would think that they would do it justice. It's beautiful. But when you're there, it is completely different. Natural beauty like this does not exist where I'm from in Illinois. I've been camping a lot of places before, as you guys know, but I was hoping that this trip was going to be a lot smoother and less friction filled. And honestly, once we arrived, it started off that way. We were all enamored by the beauty of this national park. Bree had been here a few times when she was younger, so she knew what we were walking into. But the rest of us just felt absolutely encapsulated by the beauty that we were taking in through our eyes. And there was a bunch of other people there already. So even though we were trying to find a more slightly isolated place to set up our camp, it was nice knowing that we weren't completely alone out there and there were other people camping and hiking. So our plan for the day was to go on a pretty long hike and then come back and go swimming in this beautiful lake to cool down our bodies before bed. The drive there was much longer than I prefer sitting for, and not to mention the relatively long flight the day before. I was stiff getting there and I was just so happy to move my body around, and I was so excited to go on this hike and this swim. We were all super active, healthy people, but unfortunately, Will did not look like he was capable of hiking for miles right now. But luckily he agreed to do it, and also luckily it wasn't as hot as some of our other hikes that we've taken in Arizona. The hike went pretty well, even though we had to go at a much slower pace for Will. And honestly, to give him some props, it actually allowed us to take in all of the nature around us instead of just one foot after the other, fast-paced hiking. And when I look back at it, hindsight's 2020, that moment was probably the best moment of the trip. Just walking slowly, taking in the nature, because everything started to go downhill from there. After quite a bit of time just hiking around, we eventually got to the lake that we preferred the most out of all of the lakes that were available on this hike and in this national park. And we all just excitedly stripped down into our swimming gear to get into this lake. And I turned my head to look at Ryan and Bree because I'm like, all right, we're about to go in. And they're already running towards the water as I'm barely getting my clothes in my bag. And it was so nice seeing them frolicking towards this lake, having a good time. And for a moment, I actually found a sense of peace immersing myself in watching my friend and his wife enjoying the weekend for the first time. So I followed suit and I go towards the lake with them, and I just got about like ankle deep in the water when I look back and I see Will just very slowly, barely getting his clothes off. And it's really weird because usually he's the first one to jump into any body of water, and it's weird that he's taking so long. But I guess things just changed. Things were different this time. And as I'm about to start looking back towards the water to go in fully myself, I see that Will has this like big dark bruise on his right rib. This thing was horrible, and I had no other option to bring it up to him. This wasn't something that you could just scoff over. So I immediately asked Will, yo, did somebody peg you with a baseball? Did you get lost in a batting cage? And he looks at me a little bit confused, and I'm like, dude, I point at the giant bruise on his rib and I'm like, that? And he just kind of picks up his arm and examines his rib and just goes really nonchalantly, bro, I don't even know when I got this. And then it kind of made sense because I'm like, all right, maybe he got that while he was like blackout drunk. And he's just being so nonchalant about this thing. And finally he gets all of his clothes off. He's just in his swimming gear and he makes his way over to me, actually in the water. And this dude has another one. I only noticed it because he like lifted his hand to like wave at Ryan, who was deeper in the water. And he has another massive bruise on his bicep. And I grab his wrist to stop him, to draw more attention to this. And I'm like, bro, are you telling me you actually don't remember getting these? These are massive purple welts. So now I'm acting like a scared mother that's looking for scrapes on her toddler's knees and elbows. And I'm looking all over Will's body. and Ryan and Bree see that I'm being frantic, so they swim over. And once they got closer, I see it on their face that I'm not acting crazy. These are ridiculous bruises, and they're concerned too. I'm telling you, these were not regular bruises that you get from bumping into things. Even though he was already trying to blame it on that, like, oh, he must have bumped into something the night before. It literally looked like somebody was doing it to him, like holding him down and punching him in the same spot over and over again. Or, like I said, going into a batting cage and just taking fastballs to the ribs. And I was trying my best to not feel so uncomfortable with how unwell he looked. Like, I was concerned for him at this point. Like, these bruises were horrific. They were not okay, but I didn't want to be rude, so I realized how much I was like pointing at his body and drawing attention towards these welts, and I was like, he might feel bad about this, so I kind of backed off a little bit. Because he had been venting to us earlier about his depression and how things had been going bad, and I know in this video I've been hard on him, so at that point I was like, man, things might be really bad for him. I don't want to make it worse. So we all just kind of brushed it off and agreed with him that it was probably just a drunken mistake or fall or something like that. And we thought it would probably be better if he actually soaked these in this ice cold water that's in this lake. So we just spent 2 hours in the water just kind of enjoying ourselves. And the rest of the day was a good time. And we all tried to embrace this trip and just make sure it was a fun time for Ryan. Even Will was doing his best because we really just wanted to make this about Ryan. And it had been about Will up to this point, but Will even was like, no, let's try to make him have a good weekend, and me and you will talk on the way home on our flight. We weren't going to be in Colorado for that long, so we knew that we had to really embrace this, and we actually fell into having a really good time. And after we got out of the lake and we went back to like our little campsite, we had some beef hot dogs on some nice buns, some brioche buns, and after we ate, we started making some s'mores, and I hadn't had s'mores in so long. And as we were enjoying our delicious s'mores, Will had decided to enjoy his beverage a little bit more. But at least he was sitting around the fire with us, being pretty pleasant. And Ryan was telling us very excitedly about him and Bree's travel plans and all of the plans that they had for this upcoming year. And in between Ryan talking about this, I realized that I hadn't checked any of my notifications or even let anybody know that I landed safely. So I checked my phone even though I knew that I would have no data. It is just a habit of mine. Everybody has that habit, but I also wanted to just keep track of the time. And when I pulled out my phone, I realized that it was like 10 past midnight, which meant it was officially Ryan's birthday. So I turned the screen towards everybody else, and everybody gets the cue. It's Ryan's birthday, let's start yelling. Because we're in the middle of the woods, why not yell happy birthday as loud as we want? And at this point, all of us must have had about 5 s'mores, and we've been yelling for a while. Not to mention the hike, we were fatigued. And I said to the group, guys, I'm ready to hit the hay. Let's celebrate Ryan's birthday a little bit more tomorrow. And they all agreed. So Ryan actually forgot to mention when he offered all of his brand new camping gear that he had never used before, that out of all of that camping gear, he only had 2 tents. So him and Bree got a tent, and me and Will got a tent. Obviously, I don't mind sharing a tent with a buddy. I've done it with Sam a bunch of times. I've done it with a bunch of my friends. It's normal. And no offense to Will, I would have preferred sleeping in my own tent just because I didn't really want to inhale whiskey breath all night. But we had to share, and it is what it is. At least it was brand new gear, and it was pretty spacious on the inside as well. And it didn't take long before we were both just out cold sleeping. And luckily, Ryan packed a bunch of extra blankets. I would not have been that prepared. I did not know how cold it got in that national park. I knew it got cold, but it got specifically cold in that place. And I had so many blankets, and honestly, this tent and the air mattress that he had was so comfortable. I was super cozy. I was out like a light. I probably would have had an amazing night's sleep if it wasn't for the horrible dream that I had. And it creeped me out so bad, and for some reason, it really just felt so real. And in the dream, I was in that tent with Will that I was actually in. It felt so real during that time. Like, I remember looking down and seeing the exact same blankets that I knew I had on top of me, and looking around at the tent, and it was the exact same. Nothing was altered in this dream state. It was like it was happening in real time. Everything was identical. So I opened my eyes in my dream slightly, not all the way, and I see Will sleeping next to me. And he was just on his back, and he was just snoring a little bit. And right as I'm about to kind of like blink my eyes closed and try to fall back into a deep sleep because I thought I was awake, I saw a little bit of movement at the entrance of our tent. And it wasn't just like a breeze blowing leaves around or anything like that. There was something touching it and like moving it. And I knew I was not in sleep paralysis or anything. I felt like I could move if I wanted to, but I didn't. I just kept looking at the entrance of the tent, and then finally I saw her. I watched a woman start crawling into our tent, and she was not a regular looking woman. This lady had oddly long, thin limbs with virtually no muscle tone, basically skin and bone. And her skin was dirty, but you could tell underneath the layer of dirt, it had like a gray hue to it. It was almost like she had no blood in her body. And she was wearing this dingy looking tattered dress that resembled a nightgown. And the gown looked like it was covered and rolled around in dirt for several days. And I'm just looking this woman up and down, trying to pretend to still be asleep with my eyes open just a little bit. And I keep looking at her elbows. Her elbows had no muscle tone whatsoever, so her bones were like protruding. And when she finally crawled in a little bit more, I could see her knees, and her kneecaps were protruding in the same way. And I could see her fingernails, and they were completely black. And all of her fingertips were black, like they were rotting or they had severe frostbite or something. And her hair was all dark and matted and stringy, almost like half of it had fallen out and the other half was turned into a nest by birds. And I'm just laying there trying to comprehend if this is reality or not. And I watch her crawl on top of Will and just stop. And her head is right over his, and she's just face to face with him. And her matted hair is just stringily hanging on either side of his face. But I'm just frozen there, but not like sleep paralysis. I could have moved. I knew I could have moved, but I was just laying there pretending like I wasn't seeing anything, just paralyzed with fear. But right as I was trying to make the decision if I should close my eyes, she just whipped her head and looked at me. And I could still see her rotted out cheekbones and face and protruding teeth and dark gray eyes so vividly. Her face was long and gaunt, and there was no fullness. It was sunken in completely. I could see the bones of her cheeks and her orbital bone around her eyebrows so vividly. And she had no eyebrows either, just a bony face, barren of hair, and just these deep dark eyes, and her mouth was just like a slit. This woman had no lips, it was just like a straight gash for a mouth. And I'm just laying there staring at this horrifying looking lady, and the only thing I could think of doing is just closing my eyes to blip to a different dream, and I wake up. And I was so relieved to see the sun peeking in through the tent, and I look over to Will and I see he's waking up too. I was still pretty freaked out about the dream, but I just didn't want to act weird towards him. It's not like it's his fault, and I'm a grown man. What am I going to start acting weird about a bad dream? And I knew that it was most likely just from the sugar spike that I got from 15 s'mores right before I went to bed. So I just say, "What's up? Good morning." So I'm not just awkwardly staring at him, and he just says it back. And right as he's saying it, he stretches both of his arms right out in front of him, just trying to shake off the night's sleep. And I see another horrible bruise on his arm. But this time I just kept to myself. I didn't say anything. And I realize now that I didn't say anything at the time because I didn't want to draw any more attention to it, even to myself, because I was scared of the connections that my brain was going to start making. Because right where that lady crawled on top of him in my dream, that's where the bruise was. Her hand was exactly where the bruise was. And I know that I was jumping to wild conclusions because I was so spooked. But I just said, whatever, I'm going to try to forget about this as fast as I can, and I got up and I got my day started. And when I unzip the tent, I look out and I see Bree's already up making everybody coffee. And she pulled out a couple Danishes to go along with the coffee for a fun birthday breakfast for Ryan. I passed on both of them because even though I could have used some coffee, I did not need to raise my cortisol levels any higher than it currently was. And Will crawled out of the tent pretty soon after me and just greeted everybody, but soon after he went to use the bathroom. And Ryan also got out of his tent pretty much at that same moment, and he embraced Bree for a second, but then I had to talk to them. And I go, "Guys, I just had a ridiculous dream." And they seemed a little bit intrigued at first, and they both cut me off and they're like, "We actually had some pretty weird dreams too." And I go ahead and I just tell them everything that just happened in mine. You know, sometimes when you wake up in nature, it's fun to tell like a spooky nightmare story. So I just give them every single detail that I usually probably wouldn't. I would probably just get along with my day and not tell anybody about a nightmare. But as I'm telling them about it, and this lady, they're looking at each other with some like real concern in their faces. And that made me feel super uneasy. But before I could finish my story and ask them why they're looking at me like that, Bree cut me off and goes, "Dude, we had a really similar dream. We both dreamt about something crawling into your tent. It looked like it could have been a woman, but it was hard to make out from where we were." So I start going into even more detail about what this lady was wearing and what her hair looked like and how her arms were all skinny and just every single detail that I gave you guys. And Bree looks even more shocked, and I look at Ryan, he's making a face too, but he looked kind of excited, which was a little bit weird. And he just goes, "Did we all really have the exact same dream?" And I just shrugged my shoulders a little bit because I'm trying to pretend I'm not as worked up about this as I actually am. But then Bree replied, "It's called shared dreaming." She said it with complete complete confidence, and she just said, "It happens sometimes. It's a phenomenon called shared dreaming." She continued by saying some more like woo-woo tarot card stuff, and she said that sometimes when people are sleeping, they tap into the same wave of consciousness, and we don't really know how it works, but it happens. And like I said before, I typically roll my eyes when she starts getting into the woo-woo stuff, but this time I was like, she has the answers and that makes sense to me. But I didn't really want to touch on the topic anymore because I just felt myself growing more and more anxious. But I just kept constantly wondering why that happened. Like, how did we have the exact same shared experience the night before? But luckily we were done talking about it once Will got back, and we just put on some phony smiles on our faces, just so he wouldn't feel like we were talking about him behind his back, or he would want more details about what we were actually speaking about. But as he walked up, I realized that I forgot to mention the bruise that correlated with where the lady touched him in my dream. But I didn't even need to point it out. They noticed right away, because not only could they see it, we could just look at Will, and this dude looks like he's withering to pieces. And honestly, I wasn't sure if it was because he was hungover again because he has not stopped drinking this entire time, or because of what happened to him. All I knew for sure is that I wanted to forget about that horrible dream and everything about that night completely. Because one, it was a beautiful day, and two, it was Ryan's actual birthday. So let's leave the weird, freaky shared dreaming behind. Like, today should be the best day of this trip, and that's what we all shifted our attention to. Thoughts of the dream just kept creeping back in throughout the day, but everybody knows how nightmares kind of fade, and you just forget about them, and you just kind of fall back into your everyday life. We did more hiking and exploring, and we even chatted and chopped it up with some fellow campers and hikers during the day, which was an even better distraction because talking to strangers and hearing about where they're from and asking interesting questions is the best way to keep your mind off of personal problems. I'm not going to go into every single minute detail of that day because it was very similar than the day before. Just know that we spent most of the day in the water and we made sure Ryan felt love. We had such a good time that day. It was a beautiful day. It was fantastic. It was a great birthday for Ryan. But as the sun started coming down, I started dreading the idea of getting back in that tent and going to sleep. I just didn't want that same thing to happen from the night before and have one of those creepy shared dream experiences. I did not want to see this horrifying, gaunt, pointy-elbowed lady. I'm not even gonna lie to you, I contemplated doing an all-nighter, but I just felt my eyelids just getting so heavy and I knew I wasn't gonna be capable of it. We all actually passed on the s'mores that night. I'm assuming they all came to the same conclusion that I did, that we had horrible dreams because we had a terrible sugar spike right before we went to sleep. So we just spent hours chatting instead. Naturally, Will was drinking again, but we didn't care at this point. We knew that something was up with him, but what was bothering us even more was how his energy was affecting us. It's not that any of us felt depressed with him. There was just this aura and thickness in the air around him. It just felt grim. It was just this heaviness that all of us were trying to sift through. And yes, we were able to fight through it because we were pretty happy with all of our lives, but it doesn't mean you don't feel the smog of depression and despair. And what will happen to us if it just keeps getting heavier and heavier and we just keep sitting by this guy? And eventually the conversation died down and I could tell that all of us were probably heading to bed soon. The thought of seeing that woman's face again and her little slit mouth made me want to projectile vomit. I was just trying to force myself to think happier thoughts about how beautiful this place is and how happy Ryan must be, because it was the only thing that could get me back in that tent. And I guess Will noticed how deep in thought I looked, just trying to pump myself up with positivity, so he commented on it. He just goes, "What are you all worked up about?" And honestly, it just made me feel kind of silly about being so worked up about a dream, so I just replied in a joking way that I was just trying to fill my brain with happy thoughts so I could avoid having another bad dream. And I see Will kind of smile softly as I go back to making my spot in the tent more comfortable. And once I was finished tidying up my area, I looked back at him, and this dude's still staring at me. And he had absolutely no expression on his face. And mind you, I was already so paranoid about just being back in this tent. So this instantly made me uneasy and uncomfortable. So I stare back at him, not sure what to say, just like, "What's up?" And he just says, "I've been having nightmares too." And right away I'm like, he must have had the same dream that me, Ryan, and Bree had the night before. So my mind starts spiraling. Is there something off about these woods? Why is this happening to us? But I try to put a stop to the questions that are going in my mind and just try to ask him about the nightmares that he's been having. And I just go, "Bro, what's been happening in your dreams?" I did not want to talk about it, especially because we were about to go to sleep again, but I had to know if he had seen something similar the night before. And he shook his head, signifying that he did not want to talk about it. And I respected that because I didn't really want to hear it. And I kind of felt felt like the conversation was ending in an awkward way because we're about to lay next to each other right before we go to sleep, so that's a little bit weird. So I just said, you want to hear about mine? Even though it was the last thing I wanted to talk about. And he just said, maybe tomorrow, and he rolled onto his side with his back facing me. And I just couldn't get myself to fall asleep, so I'm just laying on my back, overly fixating on every small sound I hear outside of the tent. I hated feeling this paranoid. I just couldn't stand that feeling. This trip was supposed to be fun and relaxing, but now all I could think about is how bad I just want to be back home. Or at least back at Ryan's house, just not in this forest. And I just kept thinking and thinking and thinking until eventually I just wasn't moving, so my brain turned off and I fell asleep. And then I had another dream, and this one was even worse than the first one. But this time in the dream, I wasn't laying under my covers. I was outside of the tent, and I don't know why, but I was sitting near the fire with my back towards my tent. I could hear the crackling of the flames and I could feel the heat penetrating my skin. And I'm looking around our camp, just looking into the trees and up and towards the sky, just scanning our camp. And nobody else was up, it was just me sitting by myself out there. And all of a sudden, I just got this sickening urge to turn around. There was no particular reason why I got this feeling. It was just a feeling that I needed to turn around. And when I did, I saw nothing. So I got up and I started walking over to the tent. But I stopped and I stood about 10 to 15 feet away from the opening of the tent. And I'm just standing there in this weird dream, doing nothing but just looking at this tent. And after about what felt like 10 to 15 minutes, the tent started to move as if somebody was starting to come out. And I assumed it was most likely Will, but I was wrong. I watched this same lady crawl out of this tent. She had that same dirty, dingy gown on with her black fingertips digging into the ground as she slithered out with her elbows high and her bones, skinny bones protruding like she looked like this necrophiliac spider. And her hair was completely covering her face as she's crawling out, and then she started slowly standing up. This woman, I'd only seen her crawling up to this point, but as she's standing up, I realize how massive she is. She must have been 8 feet tall, and I'm just standing there frozen, staring at her gaunt face with her light gray, dirty skin and her shins that are like 4 feet long. Her eyes look darker than ever, and her face looks twice as long as the day before. And at this point, she's standing up, and it's like she's looking down at me. I'm almost only as tall as her shins leading up to her knees. She was a horror to look at, and I'm just completely stuck in this moment with her, and that's when I noticed the blood. Her entire front of her gown were dripping in blood, and I could see little bits of blood dripping from the sides of her little slit mouth. And I know that I was filled with fear, but I just remember in that dream running towards the tent, calling Will's name, just out of concern for him. I was just blinded with my concern for my friend, and I just ran straight towards the tent until I ran into this lady's finger. This lady had picked up her long, dangling arm and just pointed it towards me and stuck her frostbitten black finger out, and I ran directly into it, and right when it touched the middle of my chest, I woke up. And that was it for me. When I woke up, I could not control how freaked out I was. I got out of that tent so fast, and to my surprise, I look over at the other tent, and Ryan and Bree are scrambling out of their tent as well. And I look at them, I take a deep breath, and I go, "Did you guys see it too?" And they both just nodded yes. And Ryan just goes, "We're packing up and leaving right now." And Will's completely still asleep, so I shake him and wake him up. I'm like, "We need to get up right now." And he's all groggy and confused, so I just tell him to go sit on a cooler while we pack everything up, because he's just a liability at this point. And the three of us were all just so focused on getting out of there as fast as we could. We weren't even talking to each other much. And finally, Will kind of comes to it, and his grogginess fades, and he goes, "What are you guys doing? Like, what happened? Why are you guys packing up? Why are we leaving right now?" I didn't even know what to say to this guy, but Bree stopped what she was doing and said, "I think there's something attached to you, and I think it's feeding on you." I hated hearing those words come out of Bree's mouth, because I'm not somebody that even believes in those kind of things. But what I saw in those dreams fully convinced me that there was something around us that we could not see, and it was somehow infiltrating our lives through Will. And Bree just said, "We're leaving right now, and right when we get home, I'm taking you to my friend who deals with these types of things." And she just grabbed his hand and held out his arm. She pointed at his bruises and she said, these are not from you bumping into things. There's something very evil following you, and we think it's attached to you, okay? But we're here and we're gonna help you. It still amazes me to this day how quickly we got all of our stuff together and broke down this campsite and got out of there. And trust me, if you saw what we saw, you would have gotten out of there as fast as we did. And the drive back to Ryan's was just such a blur. I think the whole situation just kind of put us all into shock because we were all scared. We didn't like what happened, but none of us knew the severity of what we were dealing with. And at this point, I really started feeling horrible for Will. All the feelings that I had for him before, where I was frustrated with him, kind of talking bad about him, I revoked all of that. I felt horrible because I knew that he was depressed. I knew he wasn't particularly happy in his situation. But what we saw happen to him and what was going on with him every night made me feel horrible. And once we got back to their place, my flight was the next day. So I just went and took my flight home. I didn't stick around. I really just wanted to get out of there. But Ryan and Bree let Will stay for a couple extra days. And the only reason was because they just wanted him to stay so Bree's friend could come and cleanse him. I didn't stick around for that, but I did get a little cleanse for myself before I left just so I would feel good and clean. And when I got back home, I was just blowing up Ryan's phone, just trying to get updates. Because even though I was terrified to stay there for that process and I wanted to leave, I was curious about how it all unfolded. And apparently things went great. Will flew back home about 3 days later and I texted him to see how he's doing. And after a couple more days, I made sure I FaceTime him because I wanted to see Will's face. Because I wanted to see that he was actually doing better and I wanted to chat a little bit about what happened. And to my surprise, he actually did look significantly better, and that actually scared me a little bit more because that added some legitimacy to what actually happened. He told me that the woman who helped him said that his substance abuse, negative thinking, and the trauma that he was causing himself within the battles of his own mind fractured his aura and attracted something very evil to it. And apparently he started having these really bad reoccurring dreams about 3 months ago. And he said that he would always see this lady standing in the corner of his room or crawling around on his floor. And he said that he had nightmares like this from time to time, so he didn't really think anything of it until he started feeling himself getting weaker and weaker. And then he proceeded to apologize to me about the consistent drinking on the trip because he said he couldn't stop himself from spiraling into that horrible routine of drinking every chance that he had. And it was his only way of coping with this happening to him. But he said that this weekend felt like a wake-up call to him, and he actually entered a program to help him with his addiction, and he started going to counseling with his wife, and he also said that he started practicing his faith again and is working on getting closer to God. And I guess sometimes the scariest, craziest things happen to us just to teach us to be more grateful and find the strength to heal from our pain and suffering, because you just never know what's lurking around in the darkness waiting for you to crack and let them in.